Okay, asteroids, they also need spawning in, and well, you can't have an asteroids game without asteroids, so they're kind of important. We'll start again, like we did with the bullet, by just having one of these on the screen. So in my sprites folder, I've got this meteor. I'm going to drag that in. And it's going to need a few different things. It's going to need some form of collider. I'm actually just going to go with the circle collider for this one and scale it in slightly. That'll probably do it. And it will need a rigid body with the gravity scale removed, so no gravity, and the angular drag I'm going to remove because we're going to use something called torque to give this asteroid just a little bit of spin, and angular drag would slowly reduce that over time, which we don't want. We want it to just freely spin through space. So there we go, we're set up with the visual. Let's give it some code as well. So in the scripts, let's create a C# script called asteroid controller and fire that up. And the default behavior of the asteroid is actually going to be fairly similar to the bullet, with the exception that we want to make use of the proper axis this time. We want to move in the x-axis so that eventually when we come to smash this asteroid into two smaller asteroids, we can calculate this angle and just offset them by 60 degrees each, instead of them going up this way, which would be slightly trickier, not impossible, but just a bit awkward and fiddly to calculate. We'll do it based on the angle that the maths is actually going to give us. So we'll start by storing the rigid body. We'll do a private rigid body 2D called RB, and let's grab that. Just as we did before. And we'll set it on its way, just as we did with the bullet. So rb.velocity equals transform, but this time it's transform.right. So we're going along the x-axis. And again, you might want some speed here, like we did with the bullet. These asteroids aren't going to be anywhere near as fast, but let's have a public float called speed, and by default, maybe we just leave it at 1 for the default, but you can play around with that in the inspector. So we'll do transform.right multiplied by speed, save it all up, and let's just make sure, oh, I haven't actually put it on the asteroid, so it's not going to do anything. Make sure that the code is on the game object. And there we go. And it's gone. However, we have a little script that's going to help us with that. We've got this movement wrap, and I deliberately made that as a separate component so we could nice and easily drag that onto any asteroids we make. Try that. So now, when the asteroid eventually goes off the screen, it pops back on the other side, and if we wait long enough, bosh. There we go. So that's set up and working. Now these asteroids are going to be spawned in using code. They're not going to start on the stage. Just before we turn it into a prefab and delete it from the scene, let's just add some torque to it. So torque is the physics way of spinning something. Unlike the way we rotated the spaceship earlier, where we just used the rotate on the transform component, that's not using the physics system, but that's because we want tight control over the ship. We want very strict control over the rotation. Whereas with the asteroid, a little bit of torque will be good because it's continuous. Once you've applied that torque, the asteroid will just keep spinning that way, which we didn't want for the ship, but we do want for this. So underneath, let's do rb.add torque. And then in brackets, we're going to add a random amount. And to do that, we're going to use the random class. So we're going to do random.range. And that will let us specify a minimum and a maximum if we put brackets. So the minimum, I'm going to go for -5, -5f. And then the maximum I'm going to say is 5f. So we're going to apply torque in the range of -5 all the way to +5. Make sure all the brackets are closed off, semicolon at the end, save that up and give it a quick look. And there it is. So it's spinning that way. If I reload it, it should have a different spin this time. Very slow. Let's see if we can get one going the other way. Yeah, there we go. Very slowly. anti-clockwise there. So the asteroid's mostly set up. It might need a little bit of tinkering, but for the sake of getting it spawned in using code, I'm going to turn it into a prefab and then delete it from the scene there. So let's just quickly rename it. Let's call it Asteroid, or Asteroid 1, just in case we want to make a few of these. And in the prefabs, I'm going to drag it in and get rid of it from there. So, unlike the bullet, we've got a slight issue here where the bullet is spawned from the player. The player chooses when to fire and the bullet spawns where the player currently is. We don't really have any object that we can attach these asteroids to in terms of spawning. So what you could do is make a brand new object if you wanted to. You could have a spawner object that had no physical properties, but you can be pretty confident that this main camera is always going to be in the scene. So we could actually apply the spawning script to the camera and make that responsible for spawning objects in. It's up to you which way you want to go with it. Try both, see which one you prefer, but in the scripts I'm going to right click and create a new script called spawn controller. I'm going to load that up. And this is going to be responsible for adding asteroids over time. And some of the code is going to be similar to the way the bullets work. So for example, we're going to have a public float that denotes the maximum waiting time. So that might be, we could call that next spawn. Or next spawn might be better for the private one. Let's call it spawn time. And by default, let's say it takes 5 seconds between spawns. We're then going to have a private float that tracks the time between the spawn time and 0 to count down to when we spawn the next one. So we could call this next, or next spawn. I think we used next in the bullet, so let's keep it consistent. And by default, you might want a delay at the start of the game. You don't want to instantly bombard them, so you might give them 3 seconds grace. So we'll go 3F. However, to increase the difficulty of this game, I've also added in what I've called a decay time. So the spawn time is going to decay every time a new asteroid spawns. So let's have a public float called decay. And by default, I'm going to set that to 95%, so 0.95F. We're going to multiply the spawn time, the base spawn time, by the decay every time we spawn a new asteroid. So it will effectively get 5% less. So we'll spawn 5% faster every time, and the game gradually gets difficult, and beyond that it gets impossible, so you will eventually die. So yeah, we don't need a start in here, so we can get rid of that for now. And in the update, this is where we're going to spawn the asteroids when it's a suitable time. So very similar to the way the bullets worked, we'll say if next spawn or next is greater than 0, we want to reduce it by a little bit. So I'm actually going to do this in line. I'm not going to do any curly brackets here. I'm going to do, if next is bigger than 0, next equals next minus time dot delta time, just as we did with the bullets, but without the curly brackets. Then underneath, we're going to use an else. So if there is no time to wait, we're just going to spawn an asteroid. We don't need to check for a key press or anything like we did in the bullets. So let's just get straight to it and instantiate something. But we've got no link to the prefab, so let's get that up at the top. Let's make a public game object asteroid prefab. And now in the instantiate, we can do asteroid prefab. Save that up, jump to Unity, let's drag that script onto the main camera. Just make sure it is on there. And we need to assign that asteroid prefab. So in my prefabs folder, I'm going to grab the asteroid and drag it onto the spawn controller script of the camera. Let's see how we go there. So if we wait for 3 seconds initially, we get this, and that's because, I mean, that does look pretty cool. It's because we never reset the timer when we spawned one. That was an interesting accident there. Let's just amend that one. Sorry, my bad. So next here, every time we spawn, next needs to be next plus spawn time. And we haven't made use of the decay yet, but we'll come back to that. So as cool as that last one was, pretty much unplayable. Let's see now. So 3 seconds in, we get the first one, and then 5 seconds later we should get the next one. 5 seconds after that, and so on. Yeah, right. So let's apply the decay. So to make the game harder, this spawn time is going to get smaller every time we spawn an asteroid. So to do that, we're going to do spawn time equals spawn time multiplied by the decay, which by default is 95%. But since this is public, we can play around with it in Unity, so we can actually, just for the sake of testing, exaggerate it slightly. So let's do 0.5. So it's going to get 50% faster, and we'll eventually get what we saw with the mass of rocks. So the first one was 3 seconds just because of the default. So now we wait 5 seconds for the next one. Then it should be 2.5 seconds, 1.25, and now we're going to quickly get out of hand, and then we get this, which is still pretty awesome. But pretty difficult. You're not going to shoot all of them. So let's drop that, well, raise that back to the 95% default. Eventually that will catch up with us. The game will get too difficult, but we've got to die at some point in this game. The whole point of asteroids is you will eventually lose. So we'll stick with 95%. However, the spawning positioning now needs some work, doesn't it? The asteroids are all spawning in the same place. They're all heading the same direction. So let's try and work on it. And this is where you can go a lot of different ways with it. You can apply maths to different degrees of complexity. So we'll try and keep it simple for now. I don't want to bamboozle you with stuff. But we need to specify a position and also a rotation in here. So we can make them outside of it because we don't have an object to base it on. With the bullet, we just put comma and then put the location of the spaceship, comma, rotation of the spaceship, because that's where we wanted the bullet to be and the direction we wanted it to face. However, with this asteroid, it's a bit more random. We want the rock to be somewhere off the screen, and we want it to have a random angle. So the random angle is fairly straightforward, but to get it off screen somewhere, there's various different ways you could go about it. You could pick a random angle and distance from the centre of the screen and work from there, and the maths would be a bit of trigonometry, so you might want to have a look into that. I'm going to try and use a few of Unity's built-in functions. So we are still going to have a random angle for the sake of the rotation, but just before we do that, let's get a random position. So just before the instantiate, I'm going to make a position. So we'll do that with a vector 3. In fact, no, even simpler. We'll do it straight in the instantiate. So we'll do new vector 3 for the position, and we'll spawn it high up off the top of the screen, and then we'll rotate it around the world's origin to give it a random place. So vector 3, 0 in the x, let's have a big number in the y, so maybe 20, and 0 in the z, so we don't want to go into the screen, otherwise the rotation's going to go a bit weird. And then for the last bit, for now, we'll just have a default rotation. We'll just do new quaternion. So that's just a rotation of nothing. So this new vector 3 is going to be 0 in the x, and then 20 units up, and then no movement in the z. And just to see that take effect, I'm going to save the script, and I'm going to temporarily, on my asteroid prefab, just going to disable this movement rep, because eventually that's what's going to keep these rocks on screen. But just for the sake of seeing where they spawn, I'm going to disable it for a while. And I'm going to hit play, and I'm going to swap out of game view so that we can see where they spawn. And after 3 seconds, there we go, we've got a rock up there. So they are very high up the screen. And that's okay, because when we come to wrap it, they will instantly snap back to the bottom if they do spawn up there. We're going to apply some random rotation though to get them spawning in a circle around the screen. So let's just stop there, and in the code, after we've instantiated it, we're going to rotate it around the world's centre. If we're going to do that though, we need to actually have a link to it. We're just instantiating the asteroid and then forgetting about it. So what we need is a variable here that keeps hold of it. So we're going to make a variable here that's going to be a game object type. So we're going to do game object, we'll call it asteroid equals. So we want to store the asteroid we've just instantiated. But on its own, that's probably going to give us an error, or that will give us an error, because, as the error says at the bottom, cannot convert an object to a game object. what that means is that this instantiate function, if I just hover over it, we can see that it gives us an object. It doesn't give us a game object, it gives us just a generic object. So what we can do at the end, before the semicolon, is put as game object to tell the code here that we need to treat this object as a game object, and we can then store it in this asteroid variable. You might want to refer to that as casting, so you could do a bit of reading up on what casting does. Sorry, just taking a drink. So now that we know it's a game object, we can access things like its transform component. So underneath I'm going to do asteroid dot, and we want the transform, and then we want to rotate around. So we've got this rotate around function that lets us rotate around a certain point in a given axis. So here the point we want to rotate around is dead center of the world, which is actually a vector of 0, 0, 0, or for short we can do vector3 dot 0, which gives us a quick version of it. The next bit is the axis we want to rotate in. So quickly looking at Unity here, if I flick to 3D mode, you can see that if we ever want rotation that makes sense in 2D, it's actually this z-axis we want. So if we want it to rotate in 2D space, we rotate around the z-axis. So back in the code, it's vector 3 dot forward. So that's the z-axis. The forward axis in 3D space is actually the suitable 2D axis for rotation. And then finally, it wants an angle. And here we can use that random range again. So we could do random dot range from 0 f to 360 f. So between 0 and 360 degrees. Close the random, close the rotate around, semicolon, and let's give that a go. And flick out of that to scene view and zoom out. So you can see instantly that one definitely didn't spawn straight up. It's been rotated around. 5 seconds later that one's had a little bit of rotation, and you can see their actual movement path reflects their rotation as well. So it's definitely doing something different. Whether it's 100% accurate, it's hard to prove, but it seems okay. So now we can turn the wrapping back on our asteroid prefab. Just enable that movement wrap, give it another look, and they should stay in the bounds of the screen now, so I shouldn't need to swap to scene view. And there we go, we've got an asteroid. Bosh. There's still a bit of work to go because there's a very predictable motion to them. If it spawns over here, it's going to have its movement rotated by 90 degrees, so it's going to go straight down, and that would actually mean that it ends up getting wrapped over here and just doing a little line there. So on top of rotating it around the world, we should also give it a random angle anyway, just so it's got that bit of variety. And to do that, we can change this quaternion here. So instead of having a brand new empty quaternion, we can make a new one with a different angle in the z-axis, just a random angle again. So it's a case of copying and pasting with this. So I'm going to copy and paste. I'm not going to paste straight away though. We've got to do quaternion dot Euler, which lets us do an XYZ rotation. And then in brackets, we don't want any X or Y, but we do want to paste our random Z rotation. And that's getting a bit messy, so just for the sake of understanding this line, I'm going to clip it out and just put, let's call this, we haven't used the name angle, have we? Let's call this angle. And on the line above, we'll make a quaternion called angle and then paste it in. So just to split the code up a little bit, we've made a variable called angle that is based on this X, Y, and then a random Z rotation. And then we're throwing that into the instantiate command. So we're now instantiating an asteroid at 20 units straight up from the center with a random angle. And then underneath it, we're rotating it randomly around the world's origin so that it could be anywhere, basically, at any angle. And then the wrap component that all the asteroids have, make sure they don't go too far off the screen. And let's see the combined effect of all of that. There's a bit of a wait every time. The first 3 seconds and then every time afterwards. So there, that one spawned, the angle was a bit flat, and same with that one. Just look at the draw there, and they're going to start bouncing off each other, which we don't really want, but for the sake of getting them working, it's okay. Not getting very lucky with these angles. There we go, that's better. Yeah, so that one spawned there, and it's coming in at a decent angle. That one diagonal, yeah. Okay. So far so good. They are spawning. They're spawning randomly. There's definitely randomness to it. Feel free to refine it. You might want them to spawn faster or more often, with less decay, I don't know. Play around with that, you're the designer. I'm just showing you how to put the code together. But the issue at the moment, the thing I don't like, is the way they're colliding with each other. Kind of like the way the bullet was stopping the player earlier. And we could adopt a similar approach where we make the asteroid a trigger, but just for the sake of experimenting a bit and seeing what else we can do, we're going to do it slightly differently. And to restrict them, we're going to stop similar objects colliding with each other. The physics system is going to ignore collisions between objects that are asteroids. So to find this, to make this change, we go to Edit, we go to the project settings, and we find the physics. But we want physics 2D because we're working in 2D. And down at the bottom of this new inspector panel, we've got this little matrix that shows objects that can collide with each other. And at the moment it's full of default stuff, but we can add our own to it. So for the sake of these asteroids, let's tag them as something different, or layer them as something different, sorry. So let's give them a layer. So by default, they're on default. We want to add a new layer, so let's click add layer. With the asteroid selected, we're going to change its layer. So I've just clicked to add a new layer, and I'm going to call this one asteroids. So we're going to have an asteroids layer. Then if I select the asteroid, go back to that layer drop down, I can now pick that asteroids layer. And in addition to that, going back to the project settings, physics 2D, we've now got this asteroids option. And I don't want asteroids to collide with asteroids, so you've got to find the bit where they overlap. So if you didn't want asteroids colliding with water, you would untick here. But I don't want asteroids to collide with asteroids, so I'm going to untick where they cross over. And then I'm going to play the game and see what happens. I really should speed up the spawning. Let's swap to scene view, and we just need to wait a little while for two asteroids to crash into each other. So I can sit and drink. These two look like they might clash, and they don't, they just pass through each other. But notice that the ship still gets bashed by asteroids, so that's fine. We still want to kill the player when they're hit by an asteroid, so I don't mind that. But the asteroids pass through each other, which is good. So far so good. What's left? We want to destroy this stuff, but I think I'm going to leave destruction to another video. There's an issue of spawning more asteroids when one's destroyed, but I think for the sake of video length, I'm fairly happy with that, so I'm going to leave it there. We've got asteroids that spawn, they spawn random locations with random angles, and they don't clash with each other. So I'll see you in the next one, and we'll start destroying these asteroids and the bullets when they've gone off screen as well.